Alrighty, welcome to another awesome lesson of Pro Mandarin. Well, you're probably looking at all this Chinese going, man, there's no way I can learn this all in one lesson. I don't know. Can you learn all this in one lesson? Well, let's find out. Alright, we're going to go ahead and start off with you. This verb has a few different uses in Chinese. One of the most common uses is to have something. I have, you have, or I had. It also can be used for there is or there are, as in there are some people here today, or there are cars in the parking lot, things like that, or there are 5 cars in the parking lot. And then there's also a way of describing nouns, like there are people that are tall, there are people that are skinny, there are kids that are big, that kind of a thing. All right, so let's go ahead and add in some more vocabulary here so we can get started with some examples, and then I'll get you in some practice as well. So we're going to divide this into 4 columns to start off with. We're going to leave yo right where it is, and then we're going to add in a way to negate yo, which is méiyǒu. That's the only way to negate yo. All other verbs we use bu as a negation. For all other verbs and all other adjectives and things of that nature. But for yo, the only way to negate it is by adding in mei in front of it. All right, we're going to add in some pronouns right now. If you're already familiar with the pronouns in Chinese, feel free to skip ahead now. If you're not familiar with them or you'd like to get a little extra practice with them, go ahead and stick around for this part. So first we have 我, which means I or me. Then we have 你, which means you. Then we have 他, which means he or him, as well as 她, which means she or her. And then the next part we have is 们, which makes all pronouns plural, such as 我们, which means we or us, 你们, which means you guys, and 他们, which means them or they. All right, welcome back for those that skipped the pronoun section of this lesson. Now, to give us some way of counting the number of items that we have in Chinese, we're going to add in a few numbers. So the first one is yi, as in the numbers in Chinese. Usually you start off with yi, and then 二, 三, 四, 五, and so on. We're just going to use the first 5 numbers. However, when you're counting objects, you have to use 两 for 2, as in a couple of, and then 三 for 3, 四 for 4, and 五 for 5. Now we're going to add in both the classifier and the noun. So for the first one, we have 张纸. 纸 by itself is paper. 张 is the classifier for it. The best way to describe it is, let's say somebody said, "Can you give me bread?" If they said that, you'd think that kind of seems a little bit weird. But if they said, "Can you give me a piece of bread?" then you'd know exactly what they're talking about. How about, "Can you give me a loaf of bread?" then that would make a lot more sense, right? So in Chinese, everything has a classifier. I'll give you one more example real quick. If they said, "Give me water," you'd feel kind of a little bit weird about that. But if I said, "Give me a bottle of water," or "Give me a cup of water," then you'd know exactly what I'm talking about. That's the function of classifiers in English. However, in Chinese, they use a classifier for everything. There is a default one, which I'll get to in a minute. But for now, we'll use the classifiers that you'll see for these particular nouns. And 张 is the one that's used for flat objects like a table or a piece of paper or something like that. So we're going to go ahead and use 张纸. The next one, 本书. Okay, so anything that can be bound, as in a book, a notebook, something like that, we use button. And then we use 书. 书 is book. So you can say 书 by itself, but if you're counting the object, counting how many books you would have, let's say 3 books, you would say 三本书. And then the last one we're going to use for now is cat. Now the classifier for cat is 只. Now 只 is used for quite a few different things, but in this case we're using it for small animals. And since cats are small animals, that's what we're going to use it for here. So then what we have here is 只猫. Now, 猫 is cat, so if you were to say 5 cats, you'd say 五只猫. All right, now before we get in a little bit of practice, we're going to go ahead and jump into a couple examples first. So for the first example, so let's say you want to say, "I have 3 books." So what you would say is, 我有3本书. 我有3本书. All right, for one more example, we'll say, "They have 4 cats." 他们有4只猫. 他们有4只猫. All right, now, as always, whenever I say, how would you say, followed by whatever example I'd like you to practice saying, you can always pause the video. So for the first one, how would you say she has 2 pieces of paper? 她有2张纸. 她有2张纸. Now, how would you say you guys have 5 books? 你们有5本书. 你们有5本书. Alrighty, let me give you one example with the méiyǒu. So we don't have any cats. In this case, you say méiyǒu, and then you leave out the counting classifier, or the measure word, because you're not saying any numbers here. So then what you'd say is 我们没有猫. 我们没有猫. For the next part of this lesson, I'm going to get into some other ways on how to emphasize that we don't have any at all, or even asking questions, how many do you have? So before we get into that, how would you say they don't have paper? 他们没有纸. 他们没有纸. Now let's go ahead and give one more example before we move on. How would you say she doesn't have any books? 他没有书. 他没有书. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next section. But before we do that, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. It really helps me out so I can continue to make quality content like this video. Alright, now back to the lesson. Alrighty, let's go ahead and jump into the second part of this lesson. On the left side, we're going to have 有 or 没有, depending on whether we're asking a question or we're making a statement. Then in the next column, we're going to have 多少. 多少. This means how much or how many, as in a question, but can also be used as in any or anybody, depending on what the noun is. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Then we have 几个, which is a way of also saying how much or how many. Usually, if we have an idea that it's less than 10, such as a few, instead of many or anything over 10, we're going to use 几个. And it also can be used as few in a statement as well. And then we have 一个. Now, the 个 will be replaced with any of the classifiers that were mentioned before, or any other classifier, such as one of the ones that I'm about to show you. And for the last one in this column, we have 一些, which means some. A quick note about 一些 is that because it means some and it's not denoting a specific number, you don't use it with any other numbers like 两些 or 三些 or something like that. You just say 一些. It can also be used with 这个 or 那个, which means this or that, and then you just take off the 个 classifier to make it 这些 or 那些, which means these or those. All right, in the next column, we're going to have a few new pieces of vocabulary here for you. We're going to have 人, which means a person or people. 座位, which means seat or seats. It doesn't matter whether it's a bench or a chair or anything like that. It's just a place for you to sit down, so it's a seat. And then there's 厕所, which means restroom or restrooms. And then we have 车, which means vehicle or vehicles. It could be trucks or vans or cars or anything like that. And as you may have noticed, there's a character just before it, 辆, which is the classifier for vehicles. So instead of saying 一个车, you'd say 一辆车, 两辆车, 三辆车. And that's how you'd go about counting vehicles in Chinese. Now in the next column, we're going to have 在, which is usually placed just before a location. So to make our sentences a full complete thought, or our questions a full complete thought, we're going to add in the location of where these are at. So the first one would be 这里, which means here. And there's another way of saying that, which right next to it I have 这边. Now, a lot of my relatives in Shenyang City or Liaoning Province, they'll say 这边, and that's the accent that you'll hear in that area. For the next word, we have 那里, which is there. And of course, you can always say 那边 or 那边. Again, 那边 is something that you're likely to hear in Shenyang or somewhere thereabouts. And below that, we have 这个 and 那个, which means this and that. So the final 2 words here are going to be paired up with either one. 楼 is a building, typically one that has many stories. And it does have its own classifier, 这栋楼, but I've typically heard it being used as 这个楼,那个楼. I've heard it both ways. So in this case, we're just going to say 这个,那个. And then we're also going to add in one other thing, 停车场. 停车, which means to park your vehicle, and 停车场 is a parking lot. So 这个停车场, this parking lot, 那个停车场, that parking lot. 这个楼, this building, 那个楼, that building. All right, now let's go ahead and get into a few different examples here. Let's say you want to ask how many people are in this building. You would say 有多少人在这个楼?有多少人在这个楼? All right, let's go ahead and give another example before I get you some practice in here. Let's say you want to ask how many cars are in that parking lot. Then you would say 有多少车在那个停车场?有多少车在那个停车场? So those are a couple examples using 多少. I'm going to give you a couple more examples using some of these other ones because there's so much you can do with the vocabulary that you see right in front of you, and all of it will make sense no matter which way you use it, grammatically speaking. However, there's certain ideas that you're getting across when you use it in a different way, such as if you say, there's hardly anyone here, the way you would say that is, 没有多少人在这里, or 没有多少人在这边, 没有多少人在这边. Now, if you were to say, let's say, there are hardly any restrooms in this building, maybe there's too many people and there's too few restrooms, you might say something like, 没有多少厕所在这个楼,没有多少厕所在这个楼. Again, by saying that, you're saying there are hardly any restrooms in this building. Okay, so I think you should have the idea if you're saying 有多少 is in asking a question, and then if you're answering and you use the negation form 没有多少, you're saying hardly any. Okay, so let me give you a couple other examples real quick. Let's say you want to ask how many seats are over there. You would ask 有几个座位在那边?有几个座位在那边? Or 在那里. Either one's just fine. This is, of course, you're assuming that there's only a few or less than 10. And then if you're going to say there are some cars in the parking lot, you would say a quick little note about the versus this and that. If you're saying there are some cars in the parking lot, you wouldn't have to use 这个 or 那个. You could just say 停车场, and that'd be just fine. So if you're going to say that, you would say 有一些车在停车场,有一些车在停车场. All right, so let's go ahead and ask a couple questions here, get you a little bit of practice in. Okay, so how would you say there is one seat over there? 有一个座位在那里,有一个座位在那里. Or you could say 有一个座位在那边. Okay, now let's say you've been looking for the restrooms and you found some and you say, hey, there's some restrooms over here. How would you say that? 有一些厕所在这边,有一些厕所在这边. Again, you can say it in other ways too. You could say 这里 or 这边. Any one of those is perfectly fine. All right, let's go ahead and do a couple more before we finish up here. But before we do that, just a little clarification on the word 多少. If you were to split those two words apart, 多 means many and 少 means few. So just to give you an idea, if you were to say there are a lot of something, you would say 很多. So how would you say then there are a lot of people in that building? 有很多人在那个楼,有很多人在那个楼. All right, let's practice one more here before we finish the lesson. How would you say there are a lot of cars in this parking lot? 有很多车在这个停车场,有很多车在这个停车场. All right, so that'll wrap up our lesson for today. Well, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did and haven't 点赞 or 订阅 yet, please do so now. Or in other words, please like and subscribe. Also, if you like this video and you feel you need more practice, feel free to rewatch this video as many times as you need. And if you feel ready to move on, then check out the other videos on this channel as well. I promise you'll be speaking Mandarin fluently in no time. And until next time, 下次见.